Hey there. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let your mind drift. These horror stories will crawl under your skin and linger in the dark. Let's begin. I started my hike early Saturday morning, late September. The trees had just started turning, that brilliant patchwork of orange, red, and gold that makes the Adirondacks so surreal in autumn. The weather was clear, cold at night, but still dry. I followed the herd path past Slidebrook, camped just shy of the Junction Trail, and everything seemed normal the first night. The second day, I planned to summit Macomb and continue toward South Dix. I'd taken the slide up, steep, loose gravel, and a killer on the calves, but made it to the summit just before noon. That's when I heard it. Off to my right, maybe 20 yards into the woods, I caught a voice, just a whisper. At first, I thought it was another hiker, maybe off trail, but when I called out, no one answered. The whispering stopped the moment I spoke. I waited, scanning the woods, but saw nothing. Not a twig snapping, not a squirrel darting. I moved on, trying not to let it get to me. But something about that silence stayed with me. You get used to the sounds of the woods, the wind through the branches, the occasional bird call, the chatter of small animals. But this was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. I shook it off, kept going. That night, I camped in a shallow saddle between the two peaks. As I set up camp, I noticed something odd. Around 50 yards from my site, near a cluster of old spruce trees, someone had constructed a small ring of stones. Not uncommon for campsites, but this wasn't a fire pit. It was shaped almost like a symbol, and at the center, there were animal bones, arranged deliberately. I've spent enough time outdoors to know the difference between natural decay and something intentional. These bones had been placed clean white, like someone had boiled them. I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, I thought I heard someone walking outside my tent. Slow steps. Deliberate. They circled my camp twice. I sat up, heart racing, clutching my knife. I called out, no answer. But the steps stopped. I stayed awake until first light. When I stepped outside, there were no footprints, no sign of animals, but the stone circle. It was gone, completely dismantled, not scattered, not kicked over, just gone. I packed up fast, heart pounding, and decided to cut the trip short. I wanted off the mountain, but that was when the fog rolled in. I've seen fog in the Adirondacks plenty of times, but this came fast, unnaturally so. 1 minute clear skies, the next a wall of white. I couldn't see 10 feet in front of me. I pulled out my compass and map and started down the trail toward Slide Brook. But no matter how long I walked, the path didn't look familiar. Worse, the ground was changing. Moss-covered stones, tangled roots, thick clusters of balsam fir. None of it matched the terrain I'd hiked in on. Then I saw something that made my blood go cold. A tree, massive and split in half by lightning, blackened down the middle. I had passed that tree the day before, hours before setting up camp, but it was ahead of me now, as if I'd never left that part of the forest. That's when I realized I wasn't in the same place anymore. The whispering started again, only this time it was clearer. My name, whispered low, right at the base of my ear, like someone crouched behind me. I spun around. Nothing, just fog. I started running, not caring about trails, compass, or bearings. I just wanted to get out. But no matter how far I ran, that whisper followed, weaving through the trees like smoke. My name again, and then something else. Stay. I tripped over a root and fell hard, knocking the wind from my chest. When I looked up, the fog had thinned slightly, and I saw something in the distance. A cabin, old, sagging, hidden deep within a grove of balsam and pine. I don't remember standing. 1 minute I was on the ground, the next I was walking toward it. It was like something was guiding me. That's when I saw the symbol carved into the door, the same shape as the stone circle I had seen near my camp. It looked ancient but fresh, like someone had carved it recently, gouged deep into the wood. The door was ajar, swinging slightly, and inside something moved. I froze. The whispering stopped, and in the silence I heard something breathing. The breathing didn't sound human. It was too deep, too steady, almost like it came from something that had never needed to hide before. My body was telling me to run, but I stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin door swing just slightly in the cold air. I wanted to believe it was the wind, but the trees around me were still, and the fog clung low and unmoving across the ground. Then I saw the curtain shift inside the window. That was enough. I stepped back, then turned and bolted, tearing through the brush and not caring what direction I was going. I just needed to get away from that place. I must have run a solid half-mile before I stopped to catch my breath. The fog was thinner here, enough that I could finally see the sun bleeding through the trees, but the ground wasn't right. It was soft, spongy, covered in layers of damp moss that swallowed every footstep. I looked around and realized I was somewhere I'd never seen before, even on maps. That's when I noticed something else. The woods had changed. The trees were closer together, twisted, leaning as if bent by years of wind in a place where wind didn't reach. The bark on the trunks was cracked and bleeding sap that smelled bitter. The air tasted like rust. Every instinct in me said this part of the forest was wrong, like it didn't belong to the rest of the Adirondacks. I had wandered into something older, something that didn't want me there. I kept moving, slower now, more cautious, faint, just on the edge of hearing. Like wind chimes in the distance, only I knew there wasn't any wind. They came and went, sometimes in front of me, sometimes behind, always just far enough that I couldn't tell where they really were. I thought maybe it was my mind unraveling from exhaustion, but when I reached the base of a slope and saw the remnants of an old trail marker nailed into a tree, one that hadn't been used in decades, I knew this wasn't my imagination. This was part of the forest no one used anymore. I sat down to rest, trying to figure out what direction I needed to go. My compass was still in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, opened the lid, and froze. The needle wasn't pointing anywhere. It spun slowly, then stopped, then twitched again like it was confused, like the earth itself didn't work here. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like a headache building from inside my skull. The woods were too quiet again. That heavy silence had returned. I stood, turned around, and came face to face with someone. No, not someone, something. It looked human at first, tall and thin, with skin that stretched too tight across its frame, but its eyes were wrong. They were too wide, too flat, and they didn't blink. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard a voice. Stay. The sound wasn't spoken. It bloomed inside my head like a thought that didn't belong to me. My legs buckled, and I stumbled backward. When I blinked, it was gone. No footprints, no trace. The forest was empty again, but I didn't believe it. I started walking again, faster this time, and finally, after what felt like hours, I came to a ridge. Through a gap in the trees, I saw the outline of Elk Lake far below. Real water, real sunlight. The sight was so sharp against everything else I'd been seeing that it brought tears to my eyes. I followed the ridge down, slipping twice on loose rock, cutting my hands, not caring. All I wanted was out. The forest thinned, and for the first time in over a day, I heard birds, actual birds, and then a voice, distant but real this time, a man calling out from the trailhead. I stumbled out of the woods, bloodied and exhausted. A search party was gathering. My car had been sitting for 2 days. They thought I was lost, maybe injured. They said I had been gone for 4 nights, but I had only packed for 2. I argued at first, but then I saw my reflection in one of the truck windows. I looked like I'd aged a year. My skin was pale, my eyes sunken. I never told them what really happened. I just said I got turned around in the fog, lost the trail. That's what they wrote in the report. Weeks later, back in Albany, I started doing research. I dug through old hiking logs, backcountry records, even historical societies in Keene Valley. I found references to a remote lumber camp that vanished in the late 1800s. The logs said it was built near a grove of balsam off the original Elk Lake route. They lost contact with the workers in 1893. When a recovery team went in, they found the cabins abandoned, some burned, some still intact, with food left on the tables, but no bodies. Just one note carved into a timber post. Stay. They called it Balsam Hollow. I haven't been back to the high peaks. Story 2. I grew up in Keene, just outside the foot of Hurricane Mountain. My father was a contractor who spent the off-season taking odd jobs for the town, snow clearing, carpentry, or checking out abandoned buildings before the town sent in cleanup crews. I was 17 when I asked to come along on one of those jobs, and he brought me with him to what I now wish I had never seen. It was late March. Snow still lined the trees, but the ground had softened enough to drive up some of the old access roads that twisted along the southern edge of Hurricane. One of the town clerks had gotten a complaint from a couple in Elizabethtown. They'd been walking near their summer property and swore someone was living up at the old relay station. What they described as a squat concrete box with a steel antenna mast still sticking up out of the trees. The relay station they were talking about was what remained of a Cold War-era radio monitoring site. My dad knew it well. He said the state installed it back in the 60s, supposedly to monitor air traffic. But for years after it was decommissioned, rumors floated that the place had been used for other things. Signal jamming, surveillance. Some even said testing on people from local psychiatric hospitals. But I always thought that was just small-town folklore. We drove up in my dad's work truck, taking a winding dirt road, he said, hadn't been used since the 80s. Trees closed in quickly, and there were no trail markers, no signs, just an occasional rusted pole where a wire fence might have stood decades ago. The station came into view without warning. It was half buried in the hill, a squat square building with thick concrete walls, maybe 30 feet wide, no windows. The steel door looked fused with rust. Beside it stood the old antenna, tilted and overgrown with vines, reaching maybe 40 feet up into the trees. We stepped out into the cold wind. My dad walked ahead, rattling the door handle with a crowbar. He expected it to be locked. It wasn't. The door opened with a sound like bones shifting. Inside, it was darker than I expected. Not pitch black, but low enough light that everything had a grainy grayness, like looking through tinted glass. A narrow corridor led in with old wires draped along the ceiling. A single chair sat against the wall, the kind you'd see in a school nurse's office. Metal legs, plastic seat. My dad muttered something under his breath and clicked on his flashlight. There were 3 rooms. One held rusted lockers and a panel of dead gauges. The second was empty, except for a cot in the corner with its mattress slashed down the middle. The third had filing cabinets with no drawers. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the air. It didn't smell like mold or rot. It smelled metallic, dry, as if the place had been sealed with old coins and dust. Every step echoed. I felt like someone was still there, just out of reach. We finished walking through, and my dad took a few photos for the town report. On our way out, he stopped suddenly. There was something scratched into the wall near the door. It hadn't been there when we came in. I was sure of it. It was a word. Don't. That's all it said. We looked at each other. He asked me if I had done it. I hadn't. He didn't either. And we had been together the whole time. We stepped outside into the cold light and shut the door behind us. Neither of us said anything for most of the drive home. That night, something knocked on our back door just once. Loud, heavy. When we looked, no one was there. But there was a patch of snow at the step that hadn't melted with the rest. And it had a single indent in the center, like something had pressed down with a cane or a tripod or a post. I went to bed that night with my curtains drawn and a knife on the nightstand, feeling like I had tracked something home. 2 nights later, I woke up to a sound coming from the old AM radio on my desk. It hadn't worked in years. The dial light was on, and through the static, I heard the same word whispered over and over. Don't, don't, don't. I ripped the plug out of the wall. The next morning, my dad didn't speak to me. He looked pale, distracted. When I asked what was wrong, he finally told me that he hadn't taken any photos that day. His phone had no pictures on it, none at all, but his wallpaper had changed. It was a grainy black and white photo of the corridor inside the station, and standing at the end of it, just at the edge of shadow, was someone facing the wall. We hadn't seen anyone in there, I'm sure of it. That was when we both realized we had made a mistake opening that place. But by then, it already knew where we lived. After my dad showed me the photo on his phone, we both sat at the kitchen table in silence. He deleted it right there, hands shaking, but I could tell it didn't make him feel any better. Whatever had been in that building wasn't just in the past. It had followed us back, and it wanted us to know that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in bed with the knife still on my nightstand, staring at the hallway through the crack in my door. My room was freezing. It was the kind of cold that feels too dry, the kind that comes from concrete walls instead of winter air. Just before dawn, I heard the floor creak outside my room. I sat up, my pulse pounding, but it wasn't footsteps. It was slower, like something being dragged across the wood floor. I got up, blade in hand, and opened the door just a few inches. No one was there, but at the base of the stairs, near the coat rack, there was a line, a dark line of water, or oil maybe, leading from the front door toward the basement. I didn't go down. I couldn't. In the morning, the line was gone, not faded, not dried, gone like someone had scrubbed the floor. I asked my dad if he had cleaned it. He just looked at me and shook his head. I didn't sleep last night, he said quietly. I heard your voice. I thought you were outside. I never went outside. We didn't talk much after that. Days passed. We both tried to shake it, go back to our routines, but there were things neither of us could explain. The radio started turning on by itself, first just in my room, then in the garage, always to the same AM frequency, 1187, a dead channel filled with static and the occasional blip of sound, like someone breathing, always just one breath, cut off sharply. Then, 3 days after our visit to the station, I found something in our mailbox. It was an old photograph, a print, the kind you develop in a dark room. It was curled and smelled faintly of metal and vinegar. The picture showed the interior of the relay station, but from a different angle than anything I remembered. It was taken from just inside the door, looking down the corridor. The photo was grainy, badly lit, but you could clearly make out a figure. They were crouched, back facing the camera, in the middle of the floor. A bald head, thin arms, elbows drawn in like they were shivering or praying. No clothes, no shoes, and written in thick black ink across the bottom of the image were 2 words, "Bring back." We drove to the town hall that afternoon to try and get the station sealed up again. The clerk who filed the original report wasn't in. No one knew where she was. When we asked about her, another worker said she'd taken a leave of absence, something about stress and sleepwalking. She'd been found outside her home at night twice in 1 week, once in the snow, barefoot. Her last day in the office, she'd apparently said she could hear her father's voice through her toaster. When we got back to the truck, there was another photograph under the wiper. This one showed my bedroom, not the house, my room. The angle was from the closet. I didn't go home that night. Neither did my dad. We stayed with a friend in Ticonderoga and kept the lights on until morning. The next day, my dad drove back out to the relay station alone. I told him not to, begged him, actually, but he said he couldn't sleep. He said he felt like he was still inside the place, even now. Like part of him never left. I told him I'd come with him. He said no, he wanted to go alone. He never came back. The truck was found at the bottom of the access road, engine still warm. The driver's side door was open. Keys were gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle. The door to the station was still closed, locked from the outside with the padlock he took from the garage. They searched the woods for days. I still live in Keene. I don't go anywhere near Hurricane Mountain anymore. I don't even like saying its name, but every few months I get a new photo in the mail, always unmarked, always the same smell. They come from different post offices each time. The last one showed the same corridor in the relay station, but it was darker now, dustier. The chair by the wall was gone. The wires were hanging lower, almost like vines, and in the corner, barely lit, was a new figure. They were seated, facing the camera. It was my dad, but something was wrong with his face. His eyes were wide, too wide. His mouth open like he was mid-breath, mid-sentence maybe, but stretched unnaturally far. The same expression you'd have in the instant just before screaming. I burned the photo. 2 nights later, the radio turned itself back on. This time, there was no static. Just my dad's voice, whispering the same word again and again, "Don't." And then a second voice joined him, one I didn't recognize. It said my name, and then nothing. Nothing but the sound of breathing coming from inside the wall. Story 3. I was the last one to see Mark alive. That part haunts me more than anything else. It was supposed to be a short 2-night backpacking trip. We were both experienced hikers, knew the Adirondacks like the backs of our hands, and had done dozens of trips together over the years. We planned to do a circuit around Pharaoh Lake, easy terrain, familiar trails, a good break from city noise. It was mid-October. Most of the crowds were gone for the season, and the trails had that quiet, brittle calm before snowfall. The first day went off without a hitch. We hiked in from Crane Pond, set up camp near the northeast side of Pharaoh Lake, made a small fire, and sat with our feet out toward the water. That night, we drank whiskey from a flask, talked about work, old friends, and plans for next spring's trip to Algonquin. The second day, we set out to explore the side trail leading toward Grizzle Oceans, a small, secluded pond deeper in the wilderness. The map showed a spur trail that looped around and met back up with the main path near the lake, about 6 miles total. But the map was old, and we weren't exactly sticklers for staying on established trails. Somewhere along that loop, we lost the markers. At first, we didn't care. We both had GPS. We weren't that far off the main circuit, and we figured we'd find our way back before dark. But the forest got strange fast. The terrain changed. The trees grew closer together, and the path turned to soggy ground, then to tangled roots and black water. We stepped over a downed birch, and suddenly everything behind us looked unfamiliar. We paused and checked our GPS, but it gave 2 different readings in less than a minute. Neither pointed toward the lake. Mark laughed it off at first, said maybe the satellites were bouncing off the mountains, but we both knew that didn't make sense in this part of the park. Then we found the structure. It wasn't a cabin or a shelter, just for thick logs, propped upright and bound at the top with something blackened and stiff, like old rope or sinew. Inside the square was a pile of stones, arranged like a grave marker, and on top was a bundle of sticks tied into a crude shape, almost humanoid. Neither of us touched it. We took a wide path around and kept moving, but the further we walked, the more wrong everything felt. The trees leaned in strange directions. There were no birds, no squirrels, not even insects. The air smelled heavy, like wet metal, and the ground gave underfoot like it had been hollowed out beneath us. Mark was the first to say it. "I think we're being followed." I wanted to argue, but I felt it too. That thick pressure on the back of your neck, the kind that builds when something is watching you. We kept walking, no breaks, no food, just this growing urgency to get out. We stopped once, and that's when it happened. We heard breathing, not from either of us, deep, raspy, strained, like it came from a chest that had collapsed and kept trying to inflate. It came from the trees behind us. We spun, but saw nothing. Then a whisper, "Leave him." Mark turned pale. I remember his exact words. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We ran. Branches tore at us, the underbrush pulling at our legs like hands. We didn't know where we were going anymore. We just moved. At some point, I stumbled and fell, hitting my head against a rock. Everything spun. When I came to, I was alone. I shouted for Mark. No answer. I pulled myself up, dizzy and bleeding, and started calling his name again and again. My voice echoed back at me, but nothing else, just the wind and a quiet that didn't feel like quiet. I followed where I thought he would have gone. I saw a broken branch, a boot print, even a scrap of the flannel shirt he was wearing caught on a pine. But there was no trail beyond that, just marsh. still and dark. I searched for another hour, calling, backtracking, circling, until the sun dipped below the trees. That's when I saw the figure. It stood just beyond the edge of the clearing, tall, motionless, like it had been there for a while. I lifted my flashlight, hand shaking, and aimed it, but there was nothing there. I turned in every direction. The woods were empty. Then I heard it again, that same voice, close this time. Leave him. The voice wasn't behind me, it was right beside me, like someone whispering directly into my ear. I swung the flashlight to my left, but all I saw was a narrow pine with peeling bark and a wall of black forest beyond it. I staggered backward, breathing hard, gripping the light like a weapon. I called Mark's name again, louder this time, desperate. The wind carried it nowhere, no reply. Then I heard movement, just ahead, through the trees, not crashing or running, just steady, soft footfalls, like someone walking barefoot across pine needles. I followed, each step unsure, forcing myself forward through a tangle of brambles and half-ratted stumps. That's when I saw the clearing. It was the same one with the structure we had passed earlier, but something had changed. The stones were scattered. The bundle of sticks was gone. In its place, something else had been placed in the center of the log frame. A boot, Mark's boot. I stepped closer, and just beyond it, I saw drag marks in the moss. Not deep, not dramatic, just enough to show something heavy had been pulled into the tree line. My chest felt hollow. I didn't want to follow those marks, but I knew I had to. I walked, barely breathing, eyes scanning the shadows for any shape, any sign. After maybe 50 yards, the forest opened into another small glade. There, in the middle, was Mark. He was on his knees. His head was down. His arms were limp at his sides, palms up like he'd dropped something. I stepped forward, whispering his name. No response. I moved closer, my feet barely making a sound. Mark. He raised his head slowly. His eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing me. They were glassy, blank, like he was staring through me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then his mouth opened wide, unnaturally wide, and a single word came out in a voice that wasn't his. Leave. I backed away. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. I couldn't look away from him. He tilted his head. Something flickered in his eyes for a split second. Recognition, fear. Then they rolled back, and he collapsed face first into the moss. I ran. I didn't care what direction. I didn't check the GPS. I just moved. Trees whipped past, the sky above me darkening into a deep gray blue. I remember stumbling, sliding down a hill, catching myself on a rock and shredding my hands. But I didn't stop, not until I saw the lake. Pharaoh Lake, the same lake we had camped beside just the night before. I had come full circle. Somehow my tent was gone. Everything was gone except for a torn corner of the old trail map I'd left inside the vestibule. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to a tree until dawn. By morning, I limped my way back to the trailhead and flagged down a pair of hikers. They took one look at me and called for help. Rangers showed up an hour later. I told them Mark had gone missing, gave them the coordinates where we had last seen the trail. They searched for 3 days, never found a body, never found gear, just a single boot print and a torn piece of cloth stuck to a branch, exactly where I'd seen it. They questioned me for hours. I stuck to a half-truth, said we got lost. He went to scout ahead and never came back. They logged it as a presumed fatality. marked it as a misadventure. But I know what I saw. That wasn't marked by the time I found him. Something had taken him. Something that waits in the parts of the forest people don't walk anymore. 2 weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single item, a twig figure tied with black string in the same shape we saw at the stone marker. I burned it. But some nights, when the wind dies and the air feels heavy, I hear the voice again, whispering the same thing. Leave him. Story 4. There's a stretch of land deep in the western Adirondacks called Moose Creek Hollow. You won't find it on many maps. It's old timberland, partially swallowed by the Santanoni Preserve, crisscrossed with old logging roads that haven't been maintained in decades. My Uncle Roger used to talk about it when I was a kid, called it the Quiet Quarter. Said he and a buddy went hunting up there in the early 80s and came back after one night, white as paper, never talked about it again. I should have listened. I went up there alone in the fall of 2016, not for any dramatic reason. I'd been doing freelance wildlife photography for the state, and someone in Albany requested coverage of the less travailed zones for a conservation campaign. They wanted foggy lakes, yellowing tree lines, the kind of untouched wilderness that could sell brochures and grant money. I had already shot the more popular ranges, so I dug into old forest records and found the hollow. It was listed as stay-toned but unmarked. Perfect, I thought. Raw and remote. I hiked in from an old rail spur road, made my way through about 6 miles of hardwood ridge and lowland marsh, until I reached a stretch of ground that looked completely undisturbed. No trail signs, no trash, no stacked fire rings, just pure silence. I pitched camp beside a still, dark pool fed by a narrow stream, barely wide enough to call a creek. The trees were dense, the air smelled like wet bark, and there was a constant, low murmur of wind that never touched the treetops. It felt like the place had its own pressure system. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid yet, but because of the noises. It started around 2 in the morning, light tapping, not rhythmic like branches swaying. It sounded like someone walking around the perimeter of my tent, brushing things with their fingers. I thought it was a bear at first, or maybe a deer, but the movement was too slow, too careful. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the dark with my flashlight, scanning the woods. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but I could feel something just beyond the beam, watching. The next morning, I went about my work, hiked down the ridgeline, took some shots of fog curling through the spruce, snapped pictures of old stone foundations from what must have been a logging camp. Around noon, I stumbled onto something that didn't sit right. A trail. It wasn't marked, not maintained, but it was real. The underbrush had been cleared in a way that was too clean for animals. The soil was packed. The sides showed faint boot tracks, not fresh, but recent enough to notice. I followed it for about half a mile, then came upon a wooden post driven into the center of the path. It had no signs, no blaze marks, but there were long scratches carved into the wood. Not with a knife, with something cruder, deep, uneven gouges, like someone had taken a piece of stone and scraped it over and over in the same motion. I took a photo, but when I looked at the image on my camera screen, the post didn't show up. Everything else did. Trees, trail, light. But where the post should have been, there was just blur, like the camera refused to see it. That was when I heard the voice. It came from up ahead, faint, male, with a dry rasp like someone whose throat hadn't felt water in days. "Don't come this way." I froze. "Turn around." I backed up slowly, heart hammering. The voice wasn't angry, it was tired, warning me. I turned and walked fast, back to camp, checking over my shoulder every 10 seconds. Nothing followed, but the air felt different. The light seemed thinner. That night, I woke up to something outside my tent again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Deep, steady, just on the other side of the nylon. I held my breath, not daring to move. The sound didn't come closer. It just stayed, slow and deliberate. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, cold sweat soaking into my sleeping bag. Then I saw the shadow. It passed across the mesh, tall and wrong. The arms were too long, the legs too narrow. It didn't walk like a person, more like it shifted side to side as it moved. I shut my eyes and stayed that way until the breathing stopped and the first gray light of morning began to rise. I packed up within 10 minutes. But when I stepped out of the tent, everything had changed. The creek beside my camp had gone dry. The pool was empty. The trees around me looked older, taller. Some of them I didn't recognize at all. The trail I had hiked in on was gone, swallowed by brush. I tried to retrace my steps, using the sun, my GPS, everything I had, but nothing lined up. I walked in circles for hours, daylight slipping away. Then I heard it again. "Turn around." The same voice, only this time it was behind me. I spun, flashlight raised, hands shaking, and something stepped out of the trees. The figure moved slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Tall, almost gaunt, with arms that hung too far down its sides, and legs that moved just a little too fluid, like joints weren't where they were supposed to be. Its head tilted as it stepped into the dim shaft of light filtering through the trees, and I saw that its face wasn't right. Not scarred or disfigured, just blank, pale, smooth, with a slight crease where a mouth should have been, and two dark pits that may have once been eyes. It didn't come closer, it just stood there. I couldn't make my legs move. Then, without sound, it raised one long arm and pointed back the way I'd come. "Turn around," it said again, but the sound didn't come from the mouth. It came from behind me. I turned, and nothing was there. Then I looked back. The thing was gone. I spun in a circle, heart thundering, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Nothing moved. The forest had returned to its stillness. The only sound was the wind, but even that felt wrong. It shifted directions every few seconds, never consistent, like it was changing its mind. I pulled out my GPS. Still no signal. Compass spun once, then settled uselessly. I picked a direction based on the sun and moved fast. I didn't care if I was going the wrong way anymore. I just wanted to move, to not be near whatever I had just seen. As I hiked, I noticed the trees began to change again. Not just different species. They were arranged in ways that didn't make sense. Rows of identical pines growing too close together, their trunks almost touching, like a wall. And in those trunks, I started seeing symbols, carved low, just above the moss line. Circles, crossed lines, some that looked like eyes with no pupils, all old, weathered by rain and time, but still deep and sharp, like whoever made them wanted them to last. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, sour, like rot, but as I kept moving, it grew stronger. The kind of smell you never forget, wet, decayed animal. I came to a small rise and looked down into a shallow depression. Bones, dozens of them, Small animals, deer, something else I couldn't identify, clean and dry, stacked in patterns that made my skin crawl, not scattered by scavengers, arranged, purposeful, and in the center of the pile was my camera bag. I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't left it behind. I checked the contents, all intact, batteries full. But when I turned on the camera, every photo I'd taken was gone, except one. It showed the tent from the night before, from a distance. I was inside. The figure stood beside it, hand pressed to the nylon. That broke something in me. I threw the camera into the trees and started running. I don't remember how long I moved, long enough for the light to start fading again. Eventually, I spotted something through the trees, an old trail marker, barely clinging to a split cedar post. Beneath it, the remains of a stone path, almost completely overtaken by moss. I followed it without thinking, and after another half-mile, it led me to a logging road, gravel, tire tracks, a rusted-out metal drum tipped on its side, real. It took hours, but I followed that road until I reached a sign nailed crooked to a tree. It was a forest management notice dated 1989. Below it, the remnants of an old trail kiosk. I recognized the bend in the land. I had made it back near the Santanoni outer boundary. When I finally made it to a ranger station, I told them I'd gotten lost, that my GPS failed. I kept the rest to myself. The ranger on duty nodded slowly. "You were up near Moose Creek Hollow?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah, how'd you know?" He shrugged. "Only people who come back from there always look like you do." I asked him what he meant. He just leaned on the counter and said, "Most people turn around." That was 8 years ago. I've returned to the Adirondacks a dozen times since then, but I don't go west of Santanoni anymore. I won't even look toward the hollow on a map. The state still lists it as protected timberland, untouched and unmanaged. It stayed that way for a reason, because there are things in the quiet quarter that do not want to be seen, and things that will follow you back if you try. Story 5. I was 13 the first time I heard the story about the ranger who vanished near Pharaoh Lake. It was a campfire tale passed down from my cousin Dave, whose father worked fire towers in the region during the 70s. According to him, the ranger left base one morning to check on a flooded trail and never returned. They found his radio crackling on a stump 3 days later, but no sign of him, no boot prints, no gear, just silence. When I was 29, I found myself hiking that same area on a solo trip. I didn't plan it that way. My original goal was to explore the Pharaoh mountain loop and make a 2-night camp near the lake's eastern inlet. But a storm system pushed in faster than expected, and I had to shelter in place near Crane Pond. It was early October. The foliage was just past peak. Everything had that sharp, wet leaf smell and a damp weight that made the forest quieter than normal. After waiting out the worst of the rain, I decided to move camp deeper into the forest, somewhere off-trail, maybe closer to Glidden Marsh. I liked to keep distance from other hikers, especially on long solo trips. I've been doing these since I was in college, always prepared, always cautious. But that stretch of forest didn't feel right. About 3 miles past the designated campsite zone, I came across a downed tree with gear tangled in its branches. Looked like an old backpacking rig, molded canvas, heavy zippers. It was too old to belong to anyone recent. I pulled it loose and noticed a name stitched into the flap, H. Laurent. It rang a bell. I couldn't place it at first, but I took a picture of it and made a mental note to look it up when I got back. The pack was mostly empty, just a cracked compass and a pocket knife rusted shut. The date printed inside the collar was 1983. Later that night, I made camp near a small rise overlooking the marsh. You don't get many stars in that kind of weather, but the sky opened enough for a few constellations to show through. The woods were silent, completely. No crickets, no frogs, even the owls were quiet. I remember laying in my tent, listening to nothing, and realizing how wrong that was. That's when I heard a twig snap. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far. The kind of deliberate snap that comes from a boot. I sat up, heart racing, and switched off my headlamp. I waited, eyes adjusting to the darkness. Then I heard it again. Not a branch falling or an animal stumbling. Steps. 1, 2, pause. Then again, getting closer. I whispered, a warning, loud enough to carry. Hello, you're walking into a camp. No response. The steps stopped. After a full minute of silence, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was heavy and thick with mist, clinging to my skin. I turned on the flashlight and swept it over the tree line. Nothing. But just before I turned to go back in, I saw it. A figure, way off between the trees, still watching. They were tall, wearing what looked like old ranger gear. A heavy canvas coat and a brimmed hat, like something out of a Park Service photo from the 1970s. I called out again, "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't move. I took one step forward, keeping the light on him, but the beam caught a tree, and when I angled back, he was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I convinced myself it was a hallucination brought on by stress or isolation. I made coffee, packed up camp, and started moving toward the trailhead. But every few miles, I had the feeling I was being followed. That kind of low, gnawing awareness at the base of your neck. The sense that something was behind you, just far enough that you couldn't hear it. Then I found the boots. They were sitting upright in the middle of the trail. Old leather Rangers, the kind issued decades ago. The laces were rotted, the soles cracked. Stuffed inside, one of them was a scrap of paper, yellowed with time. I opened it, expecting coordinates or a trail note. It was a map, but not one I recognized. The terrain was similar, but the trails were wrong. The lake was drawn like an eye, with tiny hash marks surrounding it in a spiral. In the corner, scribbled in fading ink, was a single word. I pocketed the paper and kept moving, faster now. My plan was to hike straight to the trailhead and call the ranger station. I wasn't hurt, but something about the discovery made me uneasy. I felt like I had stumbled into a space I wasn't supposed to find. I reached a familiar split in the trail around 4 in the afternoon, but something had changed. The markers were wrong. The yellow blaze I had followed on the way in was now red, and the signpost once marked Pharaoh Lake Trailhead to 2.1 miles now read nothing at all. Just bare wood, rotted smooth where the letters had once been carved. My map didn't match anything in front of me. I tried GPS, no signal. Then I heard it again, that same sound, 1, 2, pause, and a voice that followed, "Stay off the ridge." This time, it was close. I spun and raised my light and saw him again. Same ranger, same coat, only now his face was visible. Gray, sunken, eyes too wide, like the skin had shrunk around the bone. He raised one hand slowly and pointed to the marsh. Not this way. I stepped back, but the forest behind me had changed. The trail was gone. I stood frozen, the marsh to my left, the vanished trail behind me, and that figure still pointing. My mouth was dry, and my heart slammed against my ribs so loud I could hear it in my ears. He hadn't moved, not an inch. His arm remained extended, his long fingers aiming toward the dark stretch of trees just beyond the bog. I took one cautious step backward, thinking I could loop around and retrace my steps. But when I turned to look over my shoulder, the woods didn't look the same. The markers I had followed on the way in were gone. No blazes, no obvious cuts in the underbrush, just an endless expanse of damp birch and pine. I turned back toward the ranger. He was gone again, but something had changed. The air felt different, like pressure had dropped suddenly. My ears popped. The silence had deepened to something unnatural. No birds, no wind. Even the leaves on the ground didn't crunch beneath my boots the way they should have. I tried moving in the direction he had pointed. It was the only lead I had, and as much as I didn't trust the figure, I trusted standing still even less. I pushed through some dense ferns and angled toward the marsh, figuring I could find open water and orient myself from there. That's when I found the boot prints, old, deep set in the mud, headed the same direction I was going. I followed them. The deeper I went, the more wrong it all felt. Not just off, but impossible. The prints went on for miles, more than anyone could walk barefoot in old leather boots without them breaking down completely. At one point, the terrain shifted, and I realized I was circling the same patch of trees I had passed 20 minutes earlier. My own boot marks had crossed over the old ones, and yet they looked untouched, as if they had never been disturbed. It was getting late. The sky was dim, though my watch read just past 5. I should have had plenty of light left. I pushed through one last thicket and found myself at the shore of Pharaoh Lake, or something like it. The shoreline looked similar, but the water was black, still, too still. No ripple, no breeze. Even when I tossed a pine cone into it, the surface didn't move. It landed with a dull, hollow sound. I backed away from the edge and nearly stepped on another item. A radio, an old, boxy Ranger model. Water-stained, the antenna bent, but intact. I picked it up. It was cold to the touch, like it had been lying in snow. Then it crackled. A single word came through. Not static, not interference. A voice. Turn around. I dropped it. In the distance, across the black surface of the lake, I saw a small light flicker between the trees. It moved slowly, like someone carrying a lantern. For a split second, I felt relief. Another hiker, a camper, anyone, I shouted. The light froze. Then, without warning, it rushed forward, not across the water, but through the trees, straight toward me. I turned and ran. Branches whipped my face. Mud sucked at my boots. I had no idea where I was going. I only knew I had to get away. The light kept pace behind me, weaving in and out between trees, impossibly fast. At one point, I stumbled and rolled hard into the dirt, shoulder crunching against a root. I scrambled back to my feet, and in the brief moment I looked back, I saw it clearly. Not a lantern, an orb, floating, glowing pale white, and behind it, something tall, wearing a brimmed hat. Its eyes didn't glow, but they held light, like they reflected something that wasn't visible to me. The figure stopped at the edge of the trees as I kept running. I didn't hear footsteps, just the sound of my own breath, ragged and sharp. Eventually, I broke through the brush and found the trail again. Not a trail, a dirt road. I ran until my lungs gave out. Just as I collapsed to my knees, I saw headlights crest a hill in the distance. A truck came bouncing over the ridge, tires spitting gravel. It slowed as it approached. The driver rolled down the window. It was a ranger, a real one this time, younger, in standard uniform, clean face, puzzled expression. "You all right?" he asked. I could barely speak. I nodded, pointing back the way I came. He helped me into the truck and gave me water. I asked where we were. He told me we were near Putnam Pond, Access Road, miles away from where I had entered. I asked how he found me. He said dispatch received a call from an open ranger frequency, just static, followed by a single word, lost. I didn't say anything after that, not for a while. When we got to the station, I gave a basic rundown of what happened, but left out the figure, the voice, and the light. I told them I had gotten turned around after the storm. It was easier. Days later, after I got home, I looked up the name I had seen stitched on the pack, H. Laurent. He had been a ranger stationed in that area in the early 80s, went missing on patrol, never found, only his radio, same make, same model. I still have that map I found in the boot. I've tried to trace the landmarks, but none match current topography. One friend, a historian who works with old surveying records, told me the spiral marks drawn around the lake looked familiar, said they resembled pre-colonial burial mapping. I never went back to the Adirondacks after that, and I never hike solo anymore. Not because I'm afraid of getting lost, but because sometimes, out there, something finds you, and it doesn't let go. Story 6. I never believed the warnings about the Hudson Gorge until the day I almost didn't come back. I've hiked the Adirondacks since I was a teenager, and I thought I knew them well. But something about that deep stretch of wilderness near the Hudson always felt off. The trails were thin, the cliffs steep, and the water ran so cold it could bite your skin. I'd heard stories growing up, missing campers, strange noises, even claims of people going into the gorge and coming back. Different, but I brushed all that off as tall tales. Then Brian talked me into going. We'd been planning a weekend camping trip and wanted to avoid the popular spots. He found a route that dropped down into the gorge and followed the river to a quiet ledge near the falls. It was remote, barely used, and perfect for isolation. We packed light, brought some firewood, and hit the trail early Saturday morning. It was colder than we expected. Frost still clung to the edges of the trail, and our breath came out in visible clouds. The trees were already turning, the leaves thick underfoot. Brian was in good spirits, joking about the stories. He didn't believe any of it either. The descent into the gorge was no joke. The trail thinned until it was more suggestion than path, and I had to steady myself a few times on roots and loose rocks. But when we reached the ledge, it was worth it. The waterfall thundered down into the canyon below, mist spraying up into the air. We pitched our tent just out of range of the wet ground and built a fire before the sun dipped too low. That night, the quiet felt heavy, the kind of silence that presses in from all sides. We sat by the fire, sipping whiskey, but something about the place made it hard to relax. Brian kept glancing over his shoulder. He told me he thought he saw someone standing across the river on a flat outcrop, tall, motionless. I looked, nothing, just trees and shadow. Still, we decided to turn in early. I woke up maybe 2 hours later, not to a sound, but to a feeling, like I was being stared at. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The fire had burned low. There was no wind, no movement, but I could sense something watching us from the trees above. I didn't see anything at first, but then, out of the corner of my eye, something shifted behind the tree line. A shape just barely there, tall, not moving. I woke Brian. He sat up, listening, then froze. We both heard it, a deep, slow moaning sound. It came from somewhere up the gorge, echoing off the cliffs. Not quite human, not quite animal, just wrong. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Took turns keeping watch, staring into the trees. That sound came again, around 3 in the morning. Closer this time, lower, like it was just on the other side of the river. At first light, we packed up fast and got back on the trail. As we climbed out of the gorge, I looked back. On the ridge above the falls, I saw them. Not one figure, but several. Just standing, unmoving, watching us. Brian didn't speak for most of the hike back. Neither did I. But the worst part was when we reached the car and he turned to me and said, "I don't think they were just watching." I asked what he meant. He said, "I think they were waiting." We drove away without another word. We didn't talk much on the way back to town. The drive from Hudson Gorge took nearly 2 hours, but neither of us turned on the radio or said anything beyond the occasional direction. Brian stared out the window, knuckles white on his lap. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us down the mountain. When I finally dropped him off, he turned to me just before getting out. "We shouldn't have gone down there," he said. His voice was flat, but his eyes were wide and unblinking. "Something's wrong with that place." I nodded. He closed the door and walked inside without saying goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. My legs ached from the hike and my eyes burned, but every time I started to doze off, I heard that moaning sound in my head again, deep, hollow, and too steady to be natural. I tried to convince myself it was just wind bouncing through the canyon or a distant animal, but my gut said otherwise. 2 days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we brought something back with us. I was locking every door, checking every window. I left lights on overnight, something I hadn't done in years. Then Brian stopped answering his phone. No texts, no updates. By day 4, I drove over to check on him. His truck was in the driveway, but no one answered the door. I knocked again, louder. Finally, I walked around the back and found the sliding glass door half open. I called his name as I stepped inside. His boots were by the door. A half-eaten bowl of soup still sat on the kitchen counter. The TV was on, playing static, but the house was empty. Upstairs, the bathroom door was closed. I knocked. "Brian." Nothing. I opened it slowly. Empty. Lights off. Mirror fogged slightly, as if someone had just been in there. I walked through every room. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. Everything was still in place. Wallet, phone, keys on the nightstand. But Brian was gone. I called the police, and they treated it like a wellness check. When they didn't find signs of foul play, they suggested maybe he had gone on a hike to clear his head. I told them he wouldn't. He was too shaken. He wouldn't even answer my calls. They said they'd file a report and get back to me. That night, I couldn't stop pacing. I kept going to the window, listening to the wind. But it wasn't wind I heard. Around midnight, I heard that moan again, faint and distant, but unmistakable. It sounded like it was coming from the tree line behind my house. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The night was still. No wind, just cold air and silence. I walked across the backyard toward the trees. Halfway there, I stopped. The beam from my flashlight shook slightly in my hand. There was a figure between the trees, still, tall, exactly like what we'd seen in the gorge. It didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there. I backed up slowly, never turning my back. The figure didn't follow, but I knew what it meant. They had followed us out. I stayed awake the rest of the night, lights on in every room. At dawn, I packed a bag and drove back toward Hudson Gorge. I knew it sounded insane, but something told me Brian hadn't just disappeared. He'd been taken, drawn back, somehow. I parked at the trailhead and hiked fast, barely stopping to catch my breath. By the time I reached the ledge where we had camped, the mist was rising off the falls again. The fire pit we built was still there, but no sign of anyone. Then I saw footprints, fresh, one set, leading down toward the water. I followed them until they disappeared at the edge of the riverbank. The water ran dark and deep. A single boot sat on the rocks, soaked and muddy. It was Brian's. I called out his name. The moment the sound echoed back, that moaning returned, louder than I'd ever heard it. It came from behind the falls, from deep within the gorge. I should have run, but I stepped forward. For a second, I saw something move behind the waterfall, a tall shape, just like before, watching me from the darkness. Then it was gone. I don't remember climbing out. I only remember driving home in silence. And when I got back, there was mud on my shoes and a long cut across my arm. No memory of how it happened. Brian was never found. The case remains open. But I know where he is, and I know I'm not alone. Not anymore.